This Dharma, incomparably profound and minutely subtle, is rarely encountered, even in hundreds of thousands of millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, hold and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning.
I was just remembering the first time I ever gave a Dharma talk and how scared I was. Today I'm not scared, and I have a koan for you. It's case 39 of the Book of Equanimity. It's called Unman's Flowering Hedge. Here's the koan. A student asked, "What is the pure and everlasting body of reality?" Unman replied, "A flowering hedge." The student asked, "What is it like when one goes on in just such a way?" Unman said, "A golden-haired lion." So this student has asked, what is the pure and everlasting body of reality? And we need to ask, what is the question actually asking? And does this question have any resonance with our own questions? The student in the koan uses Buddhist language to ask his question. He asked about the pure and everlasting body of reality. Here he's using a phrase from a formulation of Buddhist thought known as the three bodies of Buddha in English and as the Trikaya in Pali. This formulation is an attempt to explain an issue which seemed to be very puzzling to early Buddhists. They had trouble reconciling the various truths, all of which they felt referred to Buddha. So in this way, the Trikaya functions somewhat like the Trinity in Christian theology. Just as the Trinity allows Christians to view Christ in a range of ways, from a simple human being to an increasingly universal and transcendent form. In the same way, the early Buddhists asked, who is Buddha? Or perhaps, what is Buddha is better. And they needed a similar leeway in their views. So the easiest of these three bodies of Buddha to understand is the Nirmanakaya. This is the actual human, physical Buddha. The historical person, Siddhartha, who lived and died in a particular time and place. This aspect of Buddha was honored, but also his humanity was recognized. The ancients also invented a body they called Sambhogakaya. Designated in English, it's called the bliss body. And even the ancestors didn't quite seem to know what this meant. There's a lot of disagreement. In the simplest terms, it seems to name someone or something which is enlightened, but not human, and yet somehow manifesting a kind of form. Very murky definitions you'll find if you look it up. And finally, there's the Dharmakaya, the body which the student in the koan is asking about. In English, this is known as the truth body. It's said to be beyond form or formlessness, and it is the unity of all things, thus it represents the essence of reality. So in this way, the Trikaya creates a kind of Buddhist trinity and attempts to explain the multiple realities of Buddha. The nature of Buddha is an issue with which modern practitioners also struggle, but I think we do it in different language. Our questions tend to be not so much about Buddha, but Buddha nature. So Buddhism says that each of us is personally has Buddha nature or is Buddha nature. Just like the human body of Siddhartha, Buddha nature is thus specific to each human. But also, like the Dharmakaya, Buddha nature is understood in wider terms. It's universal as well as specific. And it's often seen as the identity, the connectedness of all things. But as modern Buddhists, the Trikaya isn't much help in answering our questions. In fact, it often serves to confuse us even more. Peter actually gave a talk a few weeks ago in which he sort of badmouthed the Trikaya and said how it wasn't helpful. And this does seem to be true for us moderns. To the student in the koan, however, the Dharmakaya seems to be a meaningful category. He wants to know, what is the pure and everlasting body of reality? This is the Dharmakaya. Some translations render this phrase as the pure and clear Dharma body. I like everlasting, however, because it conveys the spirit of the question better than clear, I think. The word conveys a quest for something permanent, a place where we can finally rest. So though we might not relate to the reference to the Trikaya, we can definitely relate to the yearning and puzzlement behind the student's question. What is he really asking? He's asking about the big picture. He wants to know ultimate reality. He's asking about the core truth of life, about the ground of being, about the meaning of life. He's asking, what is it I'll see when I'm finally enlightened? This search seems to be what all Zen students struggle with as part of practice. And to understand why this should be so, we just need to think for a moment about the human situation. Most of our time and attention are taken up with daily life. And sometimes that life seems superficial, meaningless, a mere repetition of rote habits and tasks. Furthermore, life often causes pain and suffering. We're frequently unsure and we struggle in the dark. We feel that our life takes us nowhere near any deep or final truths. But at the same time, those of us who study Buddhism confront profound questions in our practice. And in practice, we're often tempted to invest our ideas about ultimate reality with a lot of remoteness. We do feel that Buddhism has the answers we're looking for, but we also feel that those answers are mysterious and far away from our everyday life. So while we look to our practice to provide insight, realization, experiences that will somehow open the door to a different world, a deeper reality. We're not always sure where to look, even in practice. Because of the Buddhist language we learn, we often think that this profound reality resides in what we now call emptiness or the absolute. And we set out to encounter those things, despite having no idea what they are. The yearning and sense of something missing, because we look for but can't grasp emptiness, are often a painful part of practice. Emptiness, the absolute, enlightenment. Why do we want them so much? Partly it's because we want to be sure. We want to be reassured. We're like the disciple Thomas, who needs to touch with his own hand the wounds of Christ in order to believe he is risen. We think that once we know the Dharmakaya, the pure body of reality, we'll never feel confused or doubt again. But the problem, one of the problems with the insights and experiences of realization is this: even when we have them, they're often very short, sometimes just momentary. And even if these experiences are stronger and more lasting, they're not quantifiable. They're not reducible to words and letters, something we can tell ourselves we now know. And you find that though you may have had some powerful experiences, they've not left you with anything concrete to hold on to. And this is why often we find that even Buddhists who have had insight are still not at peace. They're still grasping for more. Is this what the student from the koan is struggling with? From what follows in the rest of the koan, we can judge that he has some experience of insight. He's a monk. He's educated in Buddhism. He understands the theory of the Trikaya. And later in the koan, he responds sensibly in Dharma compat with Unman. But is he still somehow missing a confident sense of ultimate reality? Does he still feel a lack? Does he still feel as though it's not enough? Perhaps he's saying inside, tell me what ultimate reality is. I want the Big Bang. I want it in a form that will be unarguable and final. It is in the context of such a question that the great Unman answered the student. Unman said, a flowering hedge. We assume there's a hedge nearby, but given the abstract nature of the student's question, Unman's very specific answer might be quite puzzling. Ask about that which is everlasting and about the most basic reality of the universe. Unman answers by naming something that's always changing, a flowering bush. Not only does he name a fragile, growing form, but he cites it in its most transient state. The moment of blossoming for most shrubs is the shortest lived period of their life cycle. So this flowering spring hedge underlines the fact that it is definitely not everlasting. But if we look closely, Unman's reply is a brilliant answer to the student's question. It checks the tendency to want something everlasting and all-embracing. It stymies our conviction that there must be something strange and mysterious behind the forms and ordinary events of life. Because of our longing, it's hard for us to see just this bush with spring blossoms and new green leaves. We don't want reality to be ordinary. Nonetheless, this bush is the pure, clear reality. So what does it mean to say that this flowering hedge is the answer to the student's question? Just this. This is the everlasting body of reality. Even though by next week the blossoms of this everlasting thing may all be fallen. How can it be the pure and clear Dharma body? The truth is that what we have of the everlasting is a million moments in space and time. We have the 10,000 things that flash into being, change, and die. There's nothing behind the separate forms of the myriad moments. No mysterious substance. The form is all there is, and the emptiness is inherent in the form. Form is emptiness. Emptiness, exactly form. This reality the student is looking for is unnameable. We try to name everlasting reality. We call it Buddha nature, the absolute emptiness. But these names don't really convey it to our experience. The names are not it. The student would have been better off sticking with Bodhidharma's teaching that it's beyond words and letters. Will Uman's answer be enough for the student? Can he let go of metaphysical thoughts about what it all means? Can he stop longing for something more, something to hold on to? When we can't let go, we always feel as though something's missing. And this means we're never really able to see the flowering bush. We're never ever really able to hear the clack of the han, the resonance of the Jikido's bell. We never notice the patch of sunlight on the Zendo floor. But these things are Sesshin, and if we miss them, we miss Sesshin. This brings us to the next part of the koan, the student's response to Unman's answer. The student asks, what is it like when one goes on in just this way? Other translations of this question could be, how does this truth work in all times and places? How is it when the season changes? How does the truth of no change work with the reality of change? Having seen the truth of the flowering hedge, what then? How do we live our everyday lives? How do we then function in all times and places? The phrasing of the student's question can render its meaning obscure. But what he wants to know is, how can we act freely in this world of forms, of times and conditions? The koan is asking us, can you be okay with ordinary life, with your own busy mind? Or are you always longing for the truth behind the truth? This question, it's a good question. It shows the student's insight. And it shows it far better than his original query about the everlasting Dharma body. It shows us that he realizes that in logic, there's a contradiction between pure, clear reality and ordinary reality. He also sees that in realization, there is no difference between these two realities. He now asks, knowing the deepest reality, can we confront the forms and situations of everyday life in accord with this new knowledge? To recognize this dilemma and to also know there's an answer to the dilemma shows the student's insight and tests Unman's ability to respond with a meaningful answer. The commentaries on this koan say that before we have realization, we're, quote, like a monkey in a cage. We're constrained in our actions. We're all tied up, not able to act skillfully and in accord with changing situations. But once we see reality, we're sprung from our cage. We're able to flow along with worldly logic, sort of like being in the world, but not of it. We live in the ordinary world, but are not constrained by it. And the student wants to know what this looks like. This is a real problem, switching from the concrete flowering hedge to everlasting reality, because depending on how you're looking at the world, what you see as reality is very different. Is it a world of form or a world of emptiness? Is it a world of separation or of oneness? This is the dilemma that Unman's final comment needs to address. He answers using another powerful image. He responds to the student's question by saying, a golden-haired lion. Here he's using an image originated by a Chinese teacher named Fa Sang. In Japanese, because we're Japanese lineage, we often call him Fa Zhang. That's his Japanese name. He was one of the founders of the Huayan school of Buddhism. This school and its most important sutra, the Flower Garland Sutra, are very important influences in Zen. The sutra stresses the interdependence of all things. And knowing this, it may not surprise you to know that Fa Zhang was also the original of the image of Indra's net. Or that the golden-haired lion is also an icon of oneness. The sutra has a whole chapter called Essay on the Golden Lion. When Fa Zhang first began to present his teachings in Huayan, they were so complex that few people were able to comprehend them. So he resorted to images to illustrate. He wanted to show by a poetic metaphor the mutual links and interpenetration of all things, and his teaching that each object is defined by its relationship to all other objects. In Fa Zhang's image, the golden lion represents the whole universe. It is made of gold, and though it has all the various parts of a lion, mane, tail, teeth, eyes, paws, etc., all these parts are distinct, yet all are an inseparable part of one complete lion. This image is elaborated in a very poetic and quite detailed way in the Flower Garden Sutra. It is said, for instance, that the tip of each hair on the lion's mane is a whole world, and each hair tip is the whole universe. Yet each hair tip remains individual and distinct. While I was working on this koan, I happened to come across online that there really is something called a golden-haired lion. It's a tamarin, and it lives in Brazil. And it has photos of him. You can look it up if you want to see it. And it has this very fluffy, very golden mane. It's kind of strange looking if you're going by, the classic MGM lion. But it does look like a lion. So what does Unman's use of this beautiful image convey? There's some discussion in the commentaries on the koan about whether the phrase is used as praise for the student. Unman could be saying to the student, you're a golden-haired lion. Or some commentators maintain that it's just the opposite, that he's using it as a kind of satirical comment on the student, perhaps implying something like, oh, you think you're so great, you think you're a golden-haired lion, ha ha. Further, some commentators feel that Unman is simply answering the student's question by pointing to a description of the enlightened life. This kind of life knows the oneness of all things, their interdependence, but doesn't get stuck there. It is also a life which simultaneously deals with the world of form, but doesn't get stuck there either. Whatever this reply has to say about the student, it neatly illuminates the meaning of Unman's flowering hedge answer. There is a similarity between the golden lion and the flowering hedge. Both are concrete, singular objects, but at the same time, both reflect the whole universe. In Buddhist language, we might say, two faces, one die, or sometimes it's said, not one, not two. Sometimes the pure and everlasting reality appears as the flowering hedge, and sometimes it appears as a golden lion. Look, look, can you see it?